Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the next episode of the Steampunk Fantasy Park that I am tentatively calling Galdersteam. G-A-L-D-O-R or E-R is the Old English word for magic, and of course steam is for our steampunk park. I'm not sure I'm actually pronouncing it correctly. I listened to various Middle English pronunciations, but not sure that it matters too much. So we'll see. It's been a while since the last episode, and once again life got in the way. Today we'll be building the next mode of transport in the park, and this is the elevated carriageway. Both this and the steampunk trolley will be dark ride coasters of sorts, and hopefully I will get to finishing those soon. So for the elevated carriageway, I wanted to use an inverted coaster so that I can make it appear as if the carriageway is hanging from the rail. And so I'm using the 4-seater inverted coaster. It turns out that you cannot have a single car for this particular roller coaster in Planet Coaster 2, so that's why I have two here. I originally wanted just a single car, but that's not possible. And in the end, I actually end up using 3 just because I think it looks good and also for capacity. So that'll give us 12 people per coaster. So here I'm creating the carriage around the cars and the doors that will open in the station. And I chose a blue color kind of as a painted enamel sort of look. Something that I imagine the Victorians might have done if they were creating an elevated carriageway. The initial design turns out to be kind of boxy, and I'd actually wanted this to look curved top and bottom, but the pieces don't lend themselves to that because I needed an interior where obviously the guests could sit. But in the end, I change it so that the top and the bottom curve inwards to give it a more interesting look, and I think it looks a lot better. You'll see that here in a second. So here I've added some round dark gray pieces to indicate a rubber connector piece because we don't want the two cars crumpling the metal when they make a turn. I've skipped ahead to the point at which I have pretty much finished the front of the carriageway. I've tried to make it more round, and as you can see, I've given it some arches and some detail on the window posts. So just a little bit of added detail that I imagine the builders of this elevated train, whom I'm calling Steamhead and Company, would add to their carriageway. Well, I've skipped a lot of the build just to show you the completed cars. And I've added a third car with a platform on the end, which will be where the conductor will stand. And on the top you can see I have added some mechanisms to make it look like there are wheels that allow it to hang from the rail, as well as some tanks and pipes and boxes to hide the coaster box and to help with the illusion that the carriageway is hanging from the rail. Now we can create the conductor. I already had a figure that I had used previously for another build, so I just brought that in and I'm modifying the shape and proportion of the guy with a beard, kind of making him look older, and then creating a conductor's uniform out of a lot of different pieces, drapes, to give him a coat. And then after this is completed, we will be able to animate him to stand on the back platform of the last carriage. So I searched for some images of conductors in the Victorian age to kind of get an idea of what I wanted this to look like. And they all had long coats, so I'm using the drapes from the game to give them a long coat and also a vest. I originally added a top hat, but I later changed that to a cap. And I add some goggles. You usually see this in steampunk characters on airships, but I thought for an elevated carriageway it was fairly appropriate. Here I'm going to show the creation of some circular stairs that I created for the area where you enter the steampunk section and which the elevated railway or carriageway will go around. Just to add some interest, it'll be in the center of the square, and I'll show you that after I get finished building these stairs. I have a yellow ring from the aquatic pack that I've scaled to the size of the stairs that I want. There'll be two sections that descend on either side, and the ring is basically 2 meters wide, so each side will have about 6 feet of space, and then in the center I'll have some fountain or something like that. And while I didn't show it, I actually checked that 8 of these rectangular path pieces would join at their corners when I made this circle. The really nice thing now about Planet Coaster 2 is that you can copy and move path pieces like scenery pieces. So here I was able to rotate them and copy them as you would scenery pieces in a circle. So that's what makes this super easy to make circular staircase. Tagi 3D has some really great videos on making interesting paths and how you can manipulate them, including making spiral stairs. So I'll put a link in the description so you can check those out if you haven't already seen them. So here you can see I'm using the template again to create the path that will surround the descending staircase. And I did that in order to make sure that there was room for paths not to collide, because once you have them down, you can't really change anything because the game will attempt to join nodes. So that's what I'm doing here. So this shows where I have placed the circular path, and I am temporarily creating the coaster path just so that I can figure out how I want to create the supports for it. And I'm going to use the same method that I used on the bridge, give it kind of Victorian metal look. After creating the supports, I will create a circular guide around the path that I will have the supports follow to give me the curve that I'm looking for, and that the railing can follow, and then we can make this look more finished. So here I've put some posts around the path to give me an idea where this perfect circle is, and then I have laid 4 supports around it so that I can then redo the path of the coaster to follow that curve. So here I am adding some walls and addressing the circular staircase. I'm putting it in a style similar to the first episode that I used for the entrance of that future ride that we will be doing, with the same stone color, and it has that sort of classical look. I'm not going to do the whole thing, and in the end I will just show you what I've done. Finally, I wanted to create a brick building that would be on the edge of the circle. After this building, there will be the train station, but this one in the back will have a greenhouse sort of room that overlooks a waterfall and river. In the back of my mind while I'm building this, I am thinking about the piece count. So, for example, you'll see that when I do arches, I rarely create the arch myself out of smaller pieces, just because it does take a lot to do that. So it just depends on whether I feel like it's really important to the building I'm creating or what I'm trying to, the look I'm trying to get. But I do think about how many pieces something is going to take so that we don't destroy the performance of the part. Another thing is when I'm creating animated pieces or characters, while we could use a lot of movers to create all kinds of interesting movements for an individual character, like the conductor, I actually am thinking about the number I'm using, because it turns out that even if you have a mover that's not doing anything, it still affects the performance of the game, even if it's just sitting there and not triggered. So it's something to think about in the way you implement things. Next episode, I hope to do the interiors of a lot of these buildings, including Majorian's mechanical marvels, which should be interesting, so stay tuned for that. And after that, I hope to do the ride for the trolley, which will be, as I've said, a dark ride of sorts, and include all kinds of mayhem and craziness. But back to this build. You can see I am actually creating the windows so that you can see into the interior. I think that in most cases, when I do building, there will always be actual glass pieces so that you can see into the interior, at least for the first 2 floors. And in particular, certainly for the first floor, because I hope to have some sort of interior that the guests can walk into and therefore use, which will have windows you can see out of. Here's the completed building. It's inspired by various images I have gathered from Google and Pinterest, and I have added a small apartment on the second floor. I thought it was kind of interesting. I saw something like this on Pinterest in a steampunk sort of picture, so I actually created the interior that you can see here, and we will be adding some characters to it that are sitting on the patio. Now it's time to animate the conductor, and I have to make it fit behind the seats of the last car that this platform is attached to. So I wanted him to be able to lean over at the waist to look around the edge of the carriages. So that's what the first two moves are for. They will turn his waist about 30 degrees by having a very slow rotator attached to another very slow rotator, and then they will hold it there for about 16 seconds. And then on top of that, I also wanted to have his cloak move with gravity, so I'm attaching a second set of those movers to do that. And here you can see I am selecting the parts of the cloak that I want to have draped forward when he leans out to give it a more natural look. And I also have attached his right arm to that. His left arm will be swinging a lantern, and that's what the top rotator is for. Finally, there are 3 rotators you can see that are facing up, and those are for turning his head in various movements. And these are the 2 gentlemen sitting on this patio talking about, I'm sure, very important things. And so I have animated their heads and their arms a little bit. So I'll end this episode with a view from the back of the elevated carriageway.